Let me just push the go live button. Okay, so we should be live now. Hello, everyone. Cloud Study Network, the community is welcoming you, and we have today with us Tamas and Jaden, and our topic today is all about Jamstack. Hi guys, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
That's great. We already played it out before, but now let's do it again for everyone. Yeah. Jaden, everything well on your end in Philadelphia?
Absolutely. We've got nice weather outside. It's though I'm inside, but still, it's nice to look out the window and see something nice for a change.
Great. Where are you located, Thomas?
Hungary.
Oh, Hungary. Okay, nice. I saw something like on your profile connected to Great Britain or to UK. Are you like frequently also there?
Yes. That's base number one. Hungary is base number two.
Okay, nice. Okay,
you can tell from your accent.
Yeah, like typical British accent.
Yeah, and you will see color spelled with a U, so that's another giveaway.
Great. So, yeah, Tamas, please feel free to introduce yourself, and then we will switch to Jaden just for the introductions.
Sure. So, good morning, evening, afternoon to everyone who's watching us here. So my name is Tamas. I work as a developer experience engineer at Cloudinary. I'm a software engineer by trade, and I've been working in the capacity of a technical instructor, and now I do evangelism for Cloudinary, mostly around either web technologies or emerging web technologies. So that's my sort of field that I work in.
Great. Yeah, now let's switch to Jaden. Jaden, please feel free to introduce yourself, tell a little bit what are you doing and how you are related to Jamstack.
Awesome. Yeah. So I'm Jaden. It's nice to meet everybody. I'm a freelance developer from central Pennsylvania in the United States, and I got into Jamstack development a little while ago, a couple of years, and it kind of blew my mind. We were talking about this before we went live here. Actually, it kind of blew my mind at first, and so I dove right into it. Ever since, I've been trying to find ways to create simple solutions to complex problems, and that has led me to TakeShape, a company that invented a concept called an API mesh. I wasn't part of the original development team, but I turned into their biggest fan right away. So I'm excited to be talking about the API mesh a little bit here today.
Great. And to excite everyone else who is watching us now and who will be watching us afterwards as a recording, we will now switch to Tamas. And I pronounce this time your name in the right way, I hope. And
that's yeah.
Cool. And we will walk you through the Jamstack technology at first, and then Tamas will also switch to his main topic today, the performance of the Jamstack website. So Tamas, feel free to share your screen or your presentation, and let's dive in.
All right. Okay. Cool.
Yeah,
so
and before, sorry, Tamas, before you started, I have just to announce, at the end we will have a raffle where we received 2 coupons from amazing company Netlify. We will raffle them off, and I will share with you also 2 ebooks authored by Netlify and some authors related with them about the Jamstack technology. So make sure to stay until the end of the stream, and you will get the goodies. Tamas, let's go.
All right, so I'm going to go full screen here, which I just realized is going to block out the chat, but I'm going to pause every now and then to check the chat window. So if anyone has any questions, chat, and we're going to get back to you and answer those questions. Right, so the title of the talk is Unlock Performant Apps with the Jamstack. And again, there's just a quick introduction. Again, I'm going to go through this. One thing that I will point out, though, is you see the personal portfolio there. So it's tpiros.dev. So feel free to check out that site. There's blog posts and some interesting stuff up on there. So take a look at that if you can. And there are also some ways that you can get in touch with me. So even after this talk, you have questions, then you can just get in touch with me. I'll be more than happy to help you out and answer any questions to the best of my knowledge. So the presentation that we're going to take a look at has two parts. Part number one is covering what is the Jamstack, and we're going to talk about the basics and the essentially the fundamentals of the Jamstack. And the second part is going to focus on web performance. It's going to focus on one particular aspect of web performance, which is related to the core web vital metrics that Google came out with a couple of, well, many months ago. In fact, maybe a year ago as well. And then we're going to, if time permits, of course, we're going to take a look at a sample application where I'm going to explain you a few things, and then hopefully you'll understand how the Jamstack does, in fact, allow you to create performant web applications. So the question is, what is the Jamstack? So if you're new to the Jamstack, this is probably what you are wondering about. And I can tell you that the Jamstack is an abbreviation that stands for JavaScript, APIs, and markup. So these are the three terms, Jam, and this is the stack, essentially. So that's pretty much it, right? But probably you're thinking, well, thank you. I kind of read that already, or I know that already. Could you tell me what the Jamstack is? What is the essence of the Jamstack? And I find this quote from Phil Hawksworth, who is from his company called Netlify that we just talked about. And he had this quote where he said that the Jamstack is a modern architecture that allows us to create fast, secure sites and dynamic apps with JavaScript APIs and pre-rendered markup served without web service. Okay, now I kind of highlighted the most important aspects of this quote. So essentially a Jamstack site. So first of all, Jamstack is an architecture. Second of all, it allows you to create sites or web applications that are fast, that are secure, that are dynamic by using JavaScript APIs and something that is called a pre-rendered markup. But out of this code, I think the most important one, or the one that people who are new to the Jamstack find interesting is this bit, which is served without web service. So how can you create a web application or a website and then serve without a web server? Right. So that's the question here that we're trying to figure out. Now, this quote explanation or description of the Jamstack could be, or sorry, this last part of the quote could be replaced by saying, not without web service, but instead stating something like, without an origin server. Now, the question is, of course, what is the origin server? So the origin server is essentially a computer that has a piece of application on it, which is your web server, and its purpose is to respond to requests that are coming in, right? So this is a typical a web server functionality. So an origin server is in fact a web server. Now, if you think about something like the LAMP stack, which is Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP, and if you've been a web developer 20 years ago, then probably you are very, very familiar with the LAMP stack, and I know that I am, because that was one of the first stacks that I worked with, or the first environments that I worked with. And if you think about that, an application LAMP stack, every time when you request a page, and this is very important as well. So this happens on every single time when you make a page request. So you load, mysite.com, and there could be a bunch of things happening. So for example, PHP code gets executed. Maybe that PHP code runs a SQL query. The SQL query then returns some data. The PHP file that you have, or the PHP code that you have, is going to generate you some HTML code, and then that HTML is sent to the browser. So ultimately what we're looking at here, these tasks, and of course a vast number of other tasks, is what the origin server is doing. So in this case, this would be an Apache web server running on Linux in the case of the LAMP stack. A lot of moving parts, right? So there are database queries. There's data movement between potential database and application server. There's server-side code execution. So effectively, this leads you to have a large attack surface area. And surface area, attack surface area even, is a term that is being used in computer security. So if you think about the LAMP stack, your queries could be attacked by SQL injection. Your data movement can be attacked by, by attacking the network connection between the servers that you have. Server-side code execution, you could have some malicious code executed on your server. So, the places where your system can be attacked from is rather large. And then there's the question of, how do you maintain a system like this? How do you scale a system such as this one? So there are lots of, I'm not saying that the LAMP stack is bad, but there are a lot of things in here that your time, and you need to figure these things out. You need to make sure your database queries are secure, your server-side execution environment is secure, so on and so forth, right? And then you still need to develop the entire application. And then just to take you along this sort of timeline, we had the era of the LAMP stack, and now, well, not now, but 2010, 11, 12-ish, we had the era of the mean stack, which is MongoDB, Express, Angular, and Node.js, which is, really pretty much advocating JavaScript everywhere. JavaScript in the browser, JavaScript on the server, JavaScript and JSON object in my database. And stack also meant that there was a sort of rise in popularity of front-end frameworks, and this has allowed, developers to create things called the single-page applications. And with the mean stack done as developers, we made the browser the main execution engine. If you think about a single-page application, right, typical AngularJS app or a Vue.js app, a couple of years ago, every single task was executed by the browser itself. So the browser was doing a lot of legwork. Now, what we need to remember again is that the browser did this code execution on every single request. And sometimes it did go out to talk to an API, and that API was running on an Express server, which is, again, your origin server. And again, I want to point out that work was done every time when you requested a page. So, there was an API call, the API returned you some data, and then you would parse that data in your AngularJS application and then display that data. Now, this could lead to things like, bad user experience. And of course, if you work with single-page applications, then you know that search engine optimization cannot exist, because I think apart from the Google crawler, no other crawler can execute JavaScript. So they would just receive a blank piece of HTML, because everything else is bootstrapped by the JavaScript framework that you are using. So this makes us really sad. Now, developers figured out a way, which is server-side rendering. So, as opposed to telling the browser to do all the work, you would take that or sort of offload that work to the server. So every time, again, and this is going to be very critical, every time when you do a request for a page, you would sort of generate the final HTML on the server, and then you deliver that to the browser. So this, now helps with search engine optimization, because what you deliver to the browser will have all the text and all the crawlable content. And because you are relying on a server, not on the browser, on every single individual's machine that are trying to access your page, you get some consistency. And of course, this is when the term rehydration appeared, because you still need to rehydrate for dynamic events, meaning that you still need to load client-side JavaScript after you have received the initial HTML in order to allow interactivity and events for your page. I said, there's still an origin server which runs Node.js in Express. So at this point, you're probably like, thank you for this historic overview. We get it. There's an origin server. What is your point? So the point is, with a Jamstack architecture, is not to use an origin server. But the question is, what can we use if not an origin server? The answer to that is we should deploy to edge servers. So what is an edge server? And I'm pretty sure you know what an edge server is, but maybe you've called it differently. Maybe you call it a CDN. So essentially, an edge server is a set of computers that are distributed all over the globe, and their sole purpose is to deliver content to you as fast as possible, closest to your location. So if I am in London and I'm requesting a page, the page is going to be returned to me from a server close to London, whereas if I'm in Singapore, then that page is going to be returned to me from a data center in a server somewhere in Singapore or in the close vicinity. CDNs are sort of very well known for storing static assets. The JavaScript frameworks, the JavaScript libraries, the CSS files, the CSS frameworks, Bootstrap, a jQuery, so on and so forth. And we are using these CDNs to sort of deliver these static assets for our applications. Some benefits to the CDNs, right? So automatic caching is one thing. Geographical distribution is another thing. And automatic scaling and load balancing is the third thing, right? So the CDNs are taking care of all of these behind the scenes. So we, as developers, we don't know what's going on. But if 100,000 people are requesting the same file from a particular server, the CDN can actually take that load and distribute it to some other servers and to serve up that asset for you, again, in a really fast way. And they do that automatically. You don't know what's going on, right? And that's the beauty of the CDN. So the question is, JavaScript and CSS files today on CDNs, what is stopping us from storing HTML files on these edge servers? Essentially, put HTML files to the edge servers. So this is great, right? And this is jolly good, but how do you do that? Like, entire site's content, the entire HTML structure, and with all the data to an edge server. And this is when we go back to this quote from Phil and we look at the other bit, which is pre-rendered markup. So pre-rendered markup means that you will create your HTML structure at build time as opposed to request time. So this is why I was pointing out to you before that both for the lamp stack and for the mean stack, you request a page, you send a request to somewhere, there's some processing, there's some building of HTML, building a template, and then it gets sent back to you. When we say pre-rendering, we do all of that as part of a build process. Ultimately, what the build process is going to produce is going to be some static HTML. Now you can take that HTML and put it to the CDN server because those HTML files will contain everything that you need. So essentially, when you build a Jamstack site, you're going to be rendering the final data structure and the final HTML structure at build time, not at request time. That HTML can be hosted anywhere, right? But the question still remains, how do you create that? How do you do this pre-rendering of markup? And this is where we need to talk about things like a static site generator. So this is another term that's very popular in the Jamstack. So there's a vast number of static site generators out there today, which essentially allow you to create an entire application. And these are not only just responsible for generating static HTML files for you, but they are also very, very good at working with the technologies that are used to in today's sort of web ecosystem. And so you may have heard about some of these. I'm just going to list all of these out. So there's Gatsby and Next.js. So those are static site generators that are based off of React. There's Nuxt, there's VuePress, there's GridSum, which are all based on Vue.js. What this means is that if you're a Vue.js developer or if you are a React developer, getting started with a Gatsby or a Next or a Nuxt is going to be really, really easy for you. And all of these tools or frameworks or libraries, or some of them call themselves frameworks, some of them call themselves libraries, it doesn't matter. So essentially these tools will allow you to create a site in your sort of familiar environment. You add stuff to it, you get plugins, you run a command, and then based on your components and logic that you put in, it's going to generate you these static HTML files, essentially. If you're an Angular developer, then were in Node, there is a static site generator for Angular as well called Scully. And then there's, if you're not familiar with any of these frameworks, there's a vanilla JavaScript static site generator that goes by the name of 11t. If you don't know JavaScript, well, there's a Ruby-based static site generator called Jekyll. There's one based on Go, which is called Hugo. There's even one called Nifty, which is based on C++. One thing that I would like to add here is, a lot of people ask me, hey, you just said that Jamstack is JavaScript APIs and markup, yet now you talk about Ruby, Go, C++, and other things. What I want to point out here that what we're talking about now is not the J, it's not the JavaScript from the Jamstack, but it is the M, the markup. So in that sense, it doesn't really matter how you generate the static HTML, right? Whether you use Ruby or whether you use, a React-based application or a React-based framework, it doesn't matter. You'll be talking about the markup here. Here's one more thing, right? So we say static size, but they are not really static. Just going to blow your mind now. If we go back to the code, we did say that we can create dynamic apps. I didn't say that we can, or Phil didn't say that we can create static. But instead, we can create dynamic applications, and then we can use APIs. So essentially, in the Jamstack, there's a big focus on leveraging API providers. And there's, again, a vast number of API providers out there. You may have used them, of course, outside of the Jamstack, because why not, right? So for example, do you want to add payments to your site? Well, you can use something like a Stripe and the Stripe SDK or Stripe APIs. If you want to do images or media or videos, then you can use Cloudinary. And I have a wing there because I work there, of course. But if you want to send text messages from your application, you can use Twilio. You want to handle forms, you can use FormsFree. Do you want to create an entire e-commerce checkout flow just using APIs and SDKs? You can use Snipcart. If you want to add authentication, you can use Auth0.
This is the thing I'm going to be talking about in my talk as well.
Yeah.
Just adding that.
Yeah, so that's why you should stick around. And essentially, what we're talking about here is allow the companies to do what they do best, right? So all of these companies are known for doing one thing, Auth0. They only do authentication. They manage the architecture. You don't need to know what they do. You don't need to know what servers they have, what caching they have, what load balancing they have. You just call the function and it does the work for you, right? Further customization, and I'm not going to get into the API details, but further customization can be done using serverless functions or functions as a service when you want to add, you want APIs to talk, for example. Because what you need to remember is that we do not have server-side code execution capabilities. We cannot execute code on the server side because we don't have the server. We just have an edge server, but you can't execute, Node.js code in there. So you have to utilize serverless functions and other stuff. So all that being said, you now get it, right? So edge server, APIs, dynamicness, etc. Where do you get data from, right? So most websites would have, maybe a CMS. How does that work? Especially if you think about, a thing like a WordPress. So this is when we need to talk about the another term that is very popular in the Jamstack world, or Jamstack land, I should say, and that is the Headless CMS. And when I say Headless CMS, I don't mean this, which is the headless, horse rider, but now you will have these associations, so you're welcome. But instead, when I say a headless CMS, what I mean is, if you think about a traditional CMS, and that's a WordPress, right? That's a classic example that everyone would know and understand. The presentation layer and the content layer are coupled. Right? So you install WordPress, you get an admin interface, and you get a front-end interface, and you can apply a theme to it, but essentially you can't, well, you can today, but 5 years ago, you couldn't separate the two layers, right? Now there's a headless WordPress, so you can kind of do that. So when we say headless CMS, we actually mean that the content and the presentation layer are decoupled. So you effectively think of it as you chop the head off of the CMS, so you basically presentation layer. What the Headless CMS is going to give you is a way to manage your data. It's going to give you an admin interface. You will be able to add your content, users to manage the content, tagging, drafts, anything that you could think of when it comes to the CMS functionality. But how you consume that content, that's absolutely up to you. And broadly speaking, there are two types of headless CMSs out there, ones that are based on APIs and ones that are based on Git. So API-based ones would give you an API endpoint, and you would just have to use maybe the fetch API to fetch that, and then you will have the data. Git-based ones allow you to store data in like a markdown file, and then using a Git commit, you would be able to add new sort of content to the CMS. And again, just like with the static site generators, I didn't show you the all-inclusive list. There are a lot of other static site generators in the same way how there are a lot of other headless CMSs out there. So I'm just listing a few that I'm kind of familiar with that I used. Strappy, Netlify CMS, Contentful, Cosmic, Pernatic. There's Agility CMS, and there's a lot more. That's all of the Jamstack so far. So let me check the chat. Any questions? Yes. Okay, I don't see any questions.
As of now, there are no specific questions, but everyone who is watching, feel free to post your questions while our speakers are talking, so we will pick them up and talk about them as well, answer your questions. But for now, I think we are well. We can continue.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So I'm going back to full screen. So now, if you didn't know what the Jamstack is, hopefully now you do. You do know what the Jamstack is. And now we're going to talk about performance, right? So I'm going to talk about some aspects of web performance, and then we're going to see how we can tick some of these boxes using the Jamstack, and I'm going to, as I said, go into a demo. So this is a not all-inclusive web performance checklist that I kind of came up with, right? So when you think about web performance, you can slice and dice this in any way you want, but I find it's useful that, web performance is not only the front end, but it's also the back end, right? So in the back end, you have things like, did you enable compression on your web server? So, does your web server have a gzip or a Broadly compression? Are you serving content using HTTP2 or, maybe HTTP3? Do you have a media management pipeline? In other words, do you optimize your images and videos when you are serving them up from your backend? And then, of course, there's a front end, and if you're a front-end engineer, then probably you're more familiar with these things. Are you doing lazy loading of your images, or are you doing lazy loading of your components? Are you minifying your CSS and JavaScript? Are you doing preloading of your key assets? Are you managing your bundle sizes? The thing like tree shaking and that code elimination for your JavaScript bundles. Or, what about media delivery on the fly, which, again, we're going to talk about that. Probably I should have put image CDN there. So are you using an image CDN to serve up your images? And there's, a lot of additional things, how you manage fonts, and there's a lot of additional things that we could have added here, but I just came up with this sort of short list. Now, based on what I was talking about so far, just by utilizing the Jamstack and the tools and technologies that you can find in the Jamstack, we can tick a lot of these boxes. In fact, the backend box is pretty much, except for the last point, everything is checked, because as part of the Jamstack architecture, you would be deploying your site to, let's, for lack of a better term, call these Jamstack deployment providers. So these are Netlify, Vercel, AWS Amplify, Cloudflare, Pages. So all of these companies allow you to very easily and seamlessly deploy any application that you created using one of these static site generators. And when you deploy them, they will not only allow you to just store your assets, but they will also run the build process, which will also pre-render your markup, and then they will push the entire site to their CDNs. And effectively, you now achieve the fact that you will have your application on the edge server. And all of these CDNs benefit from that every CDN has. So compression is going to be enabled by default. HTTP2 is going to be there. Caching will be, also be there. Media management. Some of these providers will provide you with some basic media management capabilities. So you can also leverage that, but there are some better solutions for that. And if you think about front-end pieces, I didn't put a checkbox there, but the component lazy loading is pretty much a given, because Gatsby and all these static site generators that you would be using take care of that. They also take care of the minification. So when you create a production build of your application, they will automatically minify that. They will automatically tree shake that. They will automatically remove that code. So bundle size management, minification, again, checked. And media delivery on the file image CDNs, if you use one, because we mentioned that you can use API providers, and I'm going to show an example on that. But that's something that you can check off as well. So pretty much you're done. So by default, a Jamstack site is going to leverage all of these things that we just mentioned, and that is going to allow a Jamstack site to be super, super performant. How do you measure performance? Now, there are a lot of ways that you can do that, and since I only have about 45 minutes, I want to focus on one particular tool that you have access to straight away, which is called Lighthouse. So Lighthouse, probably the last 20 versions of Chrome, is part of the DevTools tool set. So if you have Chrome installed, and if you have the latest version of Chrome, Lighthouse is going to be available for you. Now, Lighthouse is also available as a CLI, and it's open source, so you can just search for this. It's on GitHub. You can add additional tasks to it, so there's a lot of things that you can do. You can also create your own sort of pipeline where you, as part of the build process, maybe use the Lighthouse CLI to do some performance tests, and if those are not hitting the thresholds that you've defined, you fail your build. So there's limitless opportunities here. Now, generally speaking, Lighthouse allows you to run reports, and by default, it comes with these 5 categories that you can select: performance, best practices, accessibility, SEO, and progressive web apps. So you basically start a new report, you check whether you're interested in a performance report and maybe the best practices report, you hit run. Lighthouse is going to analyze your site, and it's going to generate you a report that looks very similar to this. And if essentially you see that on the top, you get a number for each of the reports, or a score for each of the reports that you selected: performance, accessibility, best practice, and SEO. And then as you keep on scrolling, it's going to show you the sort of in-depth view of the performance report. And as part of the performance report, you get things like the metrics, the opportunities, the diagnostics. The descriptions are very well written on here, and I'm going to get into the details of this on the next slide. But also do note that as part of the Lighthouse report, you get these things called the Core Web Vital Metrics. What are those is something that I'm going to talk to you about in just a moment. So just remember, you get metrics, opportunities, diagnostics. So what does that mean? So metrics would be the Core Web Vital metrics. That these are measurements that if you fix, so if you decrease the values in under metrics, then your page load time is going to be affected. If you mess something up and one of those metrics is going to now become a higher number, then that means that your page load time is also going to go up. So anything that you change in those 6 numbers, the values in those 6 numbers, is going to directly affect the page load time. Opportunities do not directly affect the performance score, but fixing some of these things may help you to load your site faster. So these are things like, hey, are you using next generation image formats, WebP or JPEG XL? Are you doing preloads, pre-connects? Do you have a lot of unused code? Are you using compression, things like that? And then the last section in the performance report is diagnostics, which has no direct effect on the performance score. You can fix these, but it's more like, FYI, you should do some caching, FYI, make sure that your event listeners are created accordingly. Just some additional tests or audits, as they call them, that they execute. And then the other tests, I'm not going to get into that. There's a test for accessibility, for best practice, for SEO, can crawlers crawl your site appropriately, so on and so forth. But let's instead talk about the Core Web Vitals, because the Core Web Vitals have received a lot of buzz for a very important reason, and that is Google has announced that the Core Web Vital metrics are going to directly influence the search page rankings. So, Google has said that, the search page rankings are based on freshness of the content, if you're using HTTPS, relevancy of the content, so on and so forth. And now they say you need to score good in these Core Web Vital metrics. And they basically categorize them into these three groups that are related to loading, interactivity, and visual stability. And for each of these sort of terms, they came up with a metric. So for loading, the metric is called largest contentful paint, or LCP. For interactivity, it's called first input delay. And for visual stability, the metric is called the cumulative layout shift. These, what are these? So largest contentful paint, very simply put, it's going to take a look at the page that is visible on initial load, and it's going to figure out what is just content that is visible, and it's going to be measured how long that content took to load. If it's between 0 to 2.5 seconds, you're good. If it's 2.5 to 4, it needs improvement. Anything above 4 seconds is going to yield bad user experience. And I'm not going to get into the details to save some time, but there are certain elements that they take into consideration. You can research that. First input delay, expressed in milliseconds, that effectively is a delta value. And the delta value is between you trying to interact with an element and the browser or your code handling that event, right? So it's a classic example would be you have a search box, you tap that search box on your mobile, and a couple of seconds later, you get the keyboard and then you can type something in. So it's the delta between you tapping and then the application being able to process your tap that is expressed with first input delay. Remember, this is milliseconds. Anything from 0 to 100 milliseconds is good. 100 to 300 needs improvement. 300 plus, terrible experience for your users. At least we have cumulative layout shift, which recently changed. So I'm not sure if those values are still the same, but effectively, the cumulative layout shift tries to determine how much a page or how much elements on the page are jumping around. And the classic example would be you have a news website, you're reading an article, and then out of nowhere, an advert just pops in. And now you had no idea where you were, you had no idea what you were reading, and it's a bad experience. So in that case, that page is going to probably get a very bad cumulative layout, a very bad CLS score. Right, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you an example just to go through, what we talked about. And let me bring up my editor. And I'm going to do an npm start here. So what I have here is a sample application that I created using Eleventy, which is a static site generator, which is a vanilla JavaScript static site generator. And I created this sample application, which I'm going to need to open in Chrome Canary. Yeah. Localhost 8080. And you can already see that the site took a long time to load. And I'm just going to zoom in. And you see there are some sale banners. Now, of course, this is all made up, right? So this is not a proper application. But you can see that when I load this, I get a blank screen, and then I get this thing, and then now my whole layout shifts because there's the sale banner here. And then you can see that this is a typical sort of e-commerce website where there's lots of products in here that I can take a look. So first of all, actually, let's not do that. Let's not run a Lighthouse test first. But let's see what a static site generator can do. So basically, I created this using nunjucks, and there's a base thing, and I can include other nunjuck files. I can display content, and then I can write just HTML in those files, reference layout. So basically, I'm just using almost like this templating system to create my application, and then I'm going to run npm run build, which is going to essentially run a production build of this application. And as you can see, it takes the nunjuck files and is going to build an HTML for every single page that I created, and it puts it into this site folder. So if I open this HTML file now contains everything, all the data. You see here are all the watches, all the buttons, and everything is in here in place, even though in my nunjuck file, I was actually calling a for loop. So I'm dynamically building up that loop, right? So this HTML now contains everything. So I could just deploy this to any CDN using a Netlify, Vercel, and all these other providers. So let's just assume that I have deployed that. And I'm going to create an HTTP server and serve up the contents of _site. And I am going to go to localhost 8080. So this is now my HTML. Content still has these annoying features. So how can I measure the performance? The thing that I can do is come to DevTools. So this is the Chrome DevTools panel. Zoom in just a little bit more. And as I said, as of many, many versions ago, the Lighthouse is part of, I'm going to concentrate on these two reports, and I'm going to do this on desktop, generate report. So that's going to be a bunch of audits that Lighthouse is going to run, and it's going to come back with some terrible, terrible values, I'm hoping. There we go, right? So performance is 59, best practice is 100. Okay, that's fine. But there's, first of all, largest contentful pane. That's one of the core Web Vital metrics, and it's telling me that it's 4.1 seconds. Remember, I think 2 seconds, 2.5 seconds is good. 4.1 is red. That's a terrible, terrible experience. So because I have 3 minutes to go, what I want to show you is how you can further investigate what's happening. Because largest contentful pane, 4.1 seconds, thank you. What is causing that? How do I know what's causing that? So the easiest way to establish that is to go to the performance pane in DevTools and just do a sort of start profiling and reload page. To do that, there's going to be, in the latest versions of Chrome, there's going to be this thing called timings. And if you look closely, there's lots of details, but there's this thing called the LCP in here, which is the largest content pane. And first of all, if you hover your mouse over it, you see that there's an image. Highlighted, so that is what is used to calculate the largest contentful pane. But you can also take a look here in the summary and find the exact node that used up your, or was used to calculate the time for the largest contentful pane. If you do a Shift Command P, and this brings up this sort of, I don't know how this is actually called. What was the name of this? It's a DevTools command palette. I think that's the name of it. And if you just type in Web Vitals, you'll see this Show Core Web Vitals overlay. And unfortunately, it doesn't zoom in. So I don't know how much you can see that, but in here, at the top right-hand corner, there's a thing called largest content of paint, first input delay, and cumulative layout shift. It's showing you the 3 core web vital metrics live on any sort of site that you have, right? So the cumulative layout shift is going to go into the orange because of this sales banner. Now, I could go on forever. Can I take 5 more minutes?
Absolutely, yeah. Jaden, I think that should be fine, right?
Oh, you're on mute. I saw you speak, but I didn't.
Yeah, that's all right.
Okay, I think you're saying that's okay. I don't know why, but I can't hear anyone.
Yeah.
Okay, 5 minutes. Thank you. So you're probably wondering, how can you fix this? So first of all, I can't fix all of this in 5 minutes, but I'm going to tell you how you can fix things. First of all, with the Jamstack and with the sales banner for the cumulative layout shifts, and I'm not going to show this to you, but I'm going to explain to you what you need to do. You need to make sure that the up is going to have a container for whatever you want to load in the space. So what I mean is that if, as opposed to you dynamically inserting this content and then shifting down the entire site, just have a placeholder in place where you say the height is whatever the height of this banner is, and just maybe make it a little bit gray so that people will know that you're going to load something in there, and then 5 seconds later or whenever you can just load this sale banner, and that way the content is not going to shift around. So that's the easiest one. You can do the same for for this top section, or you could also just generate this content on the server so that you're not dynamically injecting this content, but it's also part of your pre-rendering process. The other thing that I want to show you is these sort of images. Now, if I go to the network panel real quick, and if I refresh this site, but you see there's a bunch of images in here. So 7 images, right? These images took up 10 megabytes. Just these 10 images. That's a lot. So you need to make sure that you optimize your images. Now, how can you do that? In order to save time, I'm going to show you one particular example, right? So I mentioned that I work at a company called Cloudinary. So what I'm going to type in here, sorry, around. I'm going to show you what I type in here in just a moment. Right. So let's assume, how should I do this? Let's put that there. Let's put this here. So that's the URL that you're looking at. So essentially, imagine that we have pictures and we uploaded that to Cloudinary. What Cloudinary does, once you upload an image, it gives you an access URL that looks like this, and you can just put it in your browser and it will load up that image. The one thing that you will benefit from is that, first of all, this image is already on a CDN. So if you're, again, in Singapore, we serve this image to you from in Singapore. If you're in London, we serve it from London. If you take a look at the details of this image using the network panel, I'm just trying to, actually, why don't I move this here? There we go. If we look at the image itself, then we will see that this is, oh, sorry, disable the cache. So this is a 583 kilobyte image, not that bad. Headers, and this is clearly going to be a JPEG. Now, I know for a fact that Google Chrome supports WebP, and WebP is a much better image format for, it has a much better compression, so I could, gain something here. That I serve up the image in a format another browser. Safari doesn't know what a WebP is, so Safari needs a different browser, a different extension. And all the versions of Firefox still don't know what a WebP is. Some browsers may already know what an AVIF is. So how can you sort of handle this? I'm going to add this fauto option to this URL, which is short for automatic format. And believe it or not, and let's make this HTTPS as well, believe it or not, Cloudinary will understand the browser that I use and is going to automatically serve up the most optimal image format for me. Notice we went from 580 kilobytes to just 49 purely because I am serving a WebP. Okay. Another thing that I can do, and then that's going to be the last thing that I will show you, is Q_auto, which is automatic quality. So Cloud Union is going to analyze the image, and it's going to reduce the quality of the image in a way that is not affecting the human eye. So the quality is still the same, but we are down to just 32 kilobytes. We didn't even shrink the image down from the 1,000 width to like 400 or anything. But instead, we applied these two things, and we saved 500 and some kilobytes just by doing that. Okay, so image optimization, image CDNs, very, very important for web performance. And this is something that you can use in the Jamstack, because Cloud Union has APIs and SDKs that you could use in static site generators and other places. Right, back to my slides. One more thing, I own this site called Jamstack.training. I'm super sorry to tell that to you, that all the courses were free, but unfortunately, because I couldn't, I was paying for all the hosting and all the everything, and it would cost me so much that I had to put a very small price tag to most of the courses. But there are still some free courses on this site, Jamstack.training. Please check it out. If you like a course, I'll be thrilled if you could buy that. But if you're just interested in the free courses, that's perfectly fine as well. But do check the site. There are lots of videos to teach you how to work with all these technologies in the Jamstack. And with that, that's all that I had. As I said, I could have gone on forever, but I don't want to take the time away from Jaden, who is now, I guess, going to talk about APIs. Let me just check if there are any questions. In fact, you know what? If you have any questions, I'll be able to answer that in the chat, so feel free to ask away. And I'm going to stop sharing, and it's Jaden's time. So thank you very much all for your attention.
Thank you very much, Tomasz. It was an amazing presentation, and we didn't expect like this whole walkthrough through the Jamstack. Thank you, Jaden.
I don't know why I can't hear you. I'm sorry. I see you tapping, and thank you, but I don't know. I lost the audio, so I may need to quickly refresh.
Yeah, feel free to rejoin if you want. Okay, cool. But Jaden, hopefully you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you, definitely. Okay, I think it's Tomasz speakers.
Tomasz, let us know if once you hear us.
Now I can hear you. I think this thing, yeah, the battery went low.
So praise and glory to you for your amazing presentation, and especially the walkthrough through the Jamstack. It was like, we have a lot of newbies here, so it will be a great introduction for them. And I was lucky to catch your Jamstack.training for free a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And I can only recommend it. I went through the two courses, I guess, and completed them. It just like hands-on, you can immediately see how it works and so on.
It's fantastic.
Highly recommend it.
Thank you.
Okay, Jaden, I think we can continue with your presentation. Let's go.
Awesome. Well, just to start off, Tomasz had mentioned in his talk the acronym that the Jamstack is based around. Now, that's not like super accurate anymore. Hi there. It's not super accurate anymore. We do a lot more than just JavaScript, APIs, and markup, but that's still kind of like the basics, right? But the weird thing is, we in the web development community, we love to make complex things simple. That's like our whole thing, right? We find simple solutions to complex problems. And we did that with JavaScript. The recent versions like ECMA script and whatnot, those are so easy to use. Like I love them. They're far easier. Markup is getting way easier. Markdown is a great way of writing markup that you don't have to go through all the tags and stuff. And I love it. And now we're getting into like components in Next.js or in like React, where it starts to become really easy to write like JSX and stuff like that. But the problem with the Jamstack, I think, is still the A. Like, APIs are still really difficult and complex. They're still very inconsistent. They all hold to slightly different versions of a standard. There were a lot of standards before, but they all kind of like branch off from the standards a little bit. It's kind of hard to keep track of. But the Jamstack industry, like I said, we like to pride ourselves on creating simple, easy to comprehend solutions to complex problems. And there is a solution to API complexity. That solution is called an API mesh. And I just wanted to chat with you about this a little bit. I'm getting so many Slack messages on the side, so I apologize if you hear the ding. Mesh, the goal is like a tool that can stitch together these external APIs into one standard conforming GraphQL endpoint. Now, I know that sounds confusing. Again, if you have any questions, just let me know in the chat. I'll try and get to them. I'm on like a 20-second delay, so I apologize if it's not right away. But basically what it does is it takes all the APIs that you want to use. Like Tomas mentioned a lot of them already, like Stripe, he mentioned Cloudinary, he mentioned, I don't know, what was some of the other ones? Forget. You can then take those all into one place, into one API. I'm proud to be representing TakeShape. They invented the API mesh, so it's going to be the most mature in the area. But there are a lot of other API meshes as well, and the concepts will transfer over if you're using one of those already. So I'm going to be talking more about the concept than the company, but I'll show you a little bit of a demonstration later on. But think of all the APIs that you'd use on any given project. Like this is an example of a stack for an e-commerce project. Like we talked about, you might use Auth0 for authentication. That's the one thing that they do, and they do it super well. You might use MailChimp or SendGrid for emails. I like to use MailChimp for and SendGrid for transactional emails. Just my personal preference. I think they do one thing really well and the other not so well. Just my opinion. Stripe, using that for payments, is very common nowadays. It's kind of like the golden standard in that area. And Snipcart is awesome for storing e-commerce products and creating an e-commerce site out of what was a normal site. And a lot of this is going to be very difficult. It's going to be difficult to stitch all these together in your application, because you'll have to go to Auth0 and then go to Snipcart and then go to MailChimp and then SendGrid and then Stripe. And connecting them all together is going to be a mess. I actually tried this a while back for an article I was writing. I just tried Stripe and MailChimp, where my idea was go to Stripe with an email, get the payment information, then with the information from Stripe, go to MailChimp and get the email preferences of that user, which is kind of a common system, right? You want to have each nugget of information wherever it belongs, like whichever API is going to use it the most. But that proved to be super difficult. The function that I wrote, it was like a Netlify Lambda function. If you're not familiar with those, like Tomas was talking about the Jamstack earlier, it's kind of like creating your own little API. AWS has them. A lot of different hosts have them. I was using Netlify, but Vercel has them as well. I love. But I noticed that porting over to TakeShape's API mesh had several key advantages. And you might have seen this slide bouncing around Twitter. It was going around a couple weeks ago. When you consume APIs the old-fashioned way, where you just bring them into your program, you go fetch the result from an API, and then you use it, and you go fetch another result from an API, that starts to get really complex. It starts to get verbose. In other words, it gets really long. It's hard to see what's going on at a glance. You can look at the function, and you'll just see a bunch of requests. You'll see a bunch of transformations. You'll be putting data here, putting it in that object, moving it all around. And it's really hard to see, like, okay, this is what that thing is doing. You can't really do that with the old way. But using an API mesh like TakeShape, all of that mess is handled by the API mesh. So what you end up doing is just making a single request, just one. It ends up being very simple, very quick to write. The process is unobscured, right? Because you're just making one request and you're not transforming all the data. You're just returning it. And so the process of making that request is super easy to identify. The data also is very unobscured because it's using GraphQL. I don't know if you've seen a GraphQL query. I don't know if you guys haven't seen this, just let me know in the chat. It's kind of like, it looks like JSON almost. There are a lot of differences, but it's very clear what data you're getting. And the data is unobscured. It's super short. There's also the issue of security, which is something I don't like to talk about because I'm not a cybersecurity expert. I don't want to be. If any of you guys like working with cybersecurity, you can have the job. I don't want it. I am very, very, very bad at cybersecurity. And that's why I love using an API mesh so much. It's one of the main reasons. Because when you're using APIs the old-fashioned way, it opens up a lot of attack vectors, like not as much as the traditional monolithic way of building websites, like with WordPress or something like that. But it's still a lot of attack vectors because you have to validate all of the information going back and forth between those APIs. With an API mesh, though, you're only sending information one way, and it's being validated by the API mesh. The only security that you really need is keeping your API key secret, which if you're not even working with sensitive data, you don't even need to do that. I was just talking to someone earlier today who's using it for blog posts, and they're just rendering it on the client side, just doing this all from client-side JavaScript, because why not? It's all not sensitive data. The other thing is, when, like I mentioned earlier, using APIs the old-fashioned way, the APIs are very inconsistent. Like there are standards. There are standards. There's the old ones like SOAP. Then there was REST, and now there's GraphQL. But they all have their different problems. You know, it reminds me of that XKCD. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, here. Can you guys see that? Yeah.
Yeah, we can see it.
This is one of my favorite comics. There are 14 competing standards. 14? Ridiculous. We need to develop one universal standard that covers everyone's use cases. Yeah. Situation. There are 15 competing standards. That ends up being how the API standards were treated. There was SOAP, and then there was REST, and now there's GraphQL, and we keep creating new ones, but they're all very inconsistent, and you end up just with more inconsistency. On the other hand, the API mesh lets you only have to deal with those external APIs once. You still have to figure them out at the beginning, but then you just kind of plug it in, almost like a telephone operator. Like you plug it in, and then the phone call is going, and you don't have to. I don't know why I'm referencing a telephone operator. I'm not that old. But the other thing is that GraphQL is standardized. You learn it once, and it works everywhere. That doesn't work the same way with the other standards. So kind of like forcing them all to use GraphQL opens up a lot of possibilities for you to use almost whatever API you want, but still have the standardization, all the benefits of GraphQL. And definitely, I encourage you to look more into GraphQL if you haven't already. It's a fantastic, fantastic standard. I love using it. Let's see here. Got too many slides open. So I wanted to show you a little demo, kind of breaking it down into a couple concepts that TakeShape uses, at least, to keep track of data flowing around your project. Now, this is where it might start to get a little bit technical. So again, if you have any questions, I have the chat open on the side here. Got multiple screens up. Let's see. I'm going to go into TakeShape. Okay. The first thing, the first kind of like I don't know what else to call them. The first thing that TakeShape uses to keep track of data flowing around your project is services. Now, if I were to go to schema in this tab, this is just in an example project, by the way. I actually already have a service set up, Netlify. Let me go back and I'll go into this one. I have a bunch of these sample projects set up. In this project, I actually have Stripe set up as a service. That's probably a better example. So I could click the create service button. It would take me here. I'm just showing you the one I already have set up, just so that I don't have to go through all of the Stripe setup again. But basically, you type in your name, you give it a slug. It automatically does a slug for you, so that's helpful. Give it a namespace and the endpoint of where the API is. Now, Stripe's API is at api.stripe.com, so that's super easy. Then you give it your authentication type. Now, Stripe is a little weird because they kind of switch back and forth between Bearer and Basic. I'm not quite sure what they're going for there, but I got it to work with Basic, and then I just give it the first part of the authentication, and then there's the colon, and then the last part of the authentication right here, the password. So I just gave it my Stripe credentials and saved it, and now TakeShape understands how to connect to Stripe. So that's like an external service. But what about internal services like storing data? Well, a lot of people like to use like WordPress or something like that for storing data. But TakeShape actually has an internal CMS that you can use. Like, for example, this is for an e-commerce site where we sell clothing. This is obviously not a real site, but it works like one. If I go into here, this is actually storing the data of my products for me. So it's kind of accomplishing the job of a CMS. So here's one. It has the name, high top lighted sneakers, has a description, a product ID for Stripe, got all the necessary data, gives me a couple options. And this actually goes to a real website. It's kind of compiled into an Next.js site. I do weekly streams on these, so you can catch me on my Twitch building some of these projects. But Stripe is where we get the price from of this product. And so what it's doing actually is going and getting the price from Stripe whenever we ask about this product in TakeShape. So it's kind of like going and grabbing data from the CMS, grabbing data from Stripe, smushing them together, and then handing it to you in a nice, neat little package. So going back to this presentation, that's services. That's the first thing that we use, right? To keep track of data. The next thing is shapes. And you already saw these. I go back into the TakeShape right there. Shapes kind of work like a TypeScript interface. Not sure if anybody's familiar with that. They've got them in other languages as well. That's just the one I'm familiar with. But it regulates what an object looks like, what keys it has, what types the values are. Basically, if I gave it an object, you could tell, does it conform to this shape? Now, what you're actually seeing here is an object full of data. It's just kind of given a GUI here, right? But this is an object full of data. There's name is just a string, high top lighted sneakers. The slug, also a string. Description is markdown type, which we differentiate from a string just for convenience. Product ID is a string. Category is like a relationship to other types of objects. But all of this is essentially an object with data in it. How do we know that we're getting what we're expecting? How do we know that name is always going to be a string? Well, we know because this object full of data conforms to the product shape. Now I can actually go in and Oops, my bad. Clicked the wrong button. I didn't have access to that piece. My bad. If I go over to homepage, though, you'll see what I'm talking about. So this is our homepage for this particular site. And if I go to edit this this product, you'll see what it looks like here. We have a title. It's a single line string, so it's a string without any new lines. We have an object that has an image in it and a relationship in it to some other product. And we have a relationship with one of these collections as well. That's another shape we have. So you can nest these. But the idea is anytime we get data about our homepage, it will be guaranteed to have this data in it. That data will be guaranteed to have these types. And that's super helpful when you're passing information around your site. Now, the last one is queries. Now, let me go to the schema page again, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Say I wanted to get all of my products. I want to take out some sensitive information here. Some of the stuff that we don't need. And run this query. This is what GraphQL looks like, by the way, if you were curious about that earlier. This is GraphQL here. And this page is just a sample GraphQL runner. It's actually submitting it to this endpoint down here. So you can do this from JavaScript or whatever language you want. And basically what I'm doing is I'm getting the list of items. Here's one, fall bomber jacket. That it's the description, an awesome jacket that I'd look really spiffy in. It comes in navy, black, and gray. We have all of these pieces of information. But this price data, that comes from Stripe. It just actually went to Stripe and merged that data in with my CMS data. Isn't that awesome? So this query, the query called get product list, is set up to be able to merge those two services together. And you can do this with any amount of services. I told you earlier I did it with Stripe and MailChimp. But you could do it with all of the APIs that you want. Tomas mentioned a single project that could use, 7 APIs or something like that. You can hook them all together with TakeShape and just run one query to get all of the necessary data. Just if you're curious, there's a JSON file that manages all of this. It's right here in the schema page. You can just edit it in here. And there's a whole documentation on this, so I won't go into detail now, but that's how you can create these queries and stitch all these APIs together. So back to queries right there. So that's it. The API mesh is working. If you were following along in TakeShape, if you were following along, then that's great. If not, it's at takeshape.io. That's just that's something you can maybe play around with a little bit after the talk. Basically, we were just able to create a dynamic way of keeping track of all of our data. We're moving it around and doing a bunch of complex stuff with it, but we were able to describe it in simple terms. We're able to simplify working with APIs. You just kind of plug them into the API mesh, and it does all of the messy work. To add on to that, actually, and I mentioned this at a WordPress conference the other day, actually, 40% of all websites are built with WordPress now. So if you're using WordPress, we like to deride it in the Jamstack community. We like to talk about how terrible it is. But if you are using WordPress, that's not actually so bad. We like to joke about it, but you can actually have the best of both worlds. Like I showed you storing information in TakeShape and then just merging it in. But who's to say that WordPress can't be an external service that you plug into your API mesh? There's actually down here, wp-graphql.com. So I can pull that up. There it is. It's a really awesome tool. You can plug it into your WordPress installation, and it will give you a GraphQL API. So then you can just kind of plug that into TakeShape, and boom, all your data can now be stored in WordPress where you like it. So you don't have to change your whole ways. It's just about thinking a little bit smarter, trying to improve performance like Tomas was talking about earlier. Well, let me get back to this presentation. That's pretty much it. This is takeshape.io is the website that we're at. You can join our Slack if you were to sign up for a free account. You get an information to our Slack. And we're at takeshape.io on Twitter. And if you're interested in catching me, I'm at Jaden Guitarman on Twitter. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know. Otherwise, I think I'm done. You can turn it back over to
Thank you, Jaden. Thank you very much. It was an amazing presentation as well. An interesting point at the end with the WordPress thing, you know. Actually, yeah, there are solutions where you can still keep using your WordPress setup, but still make it like Jamstack-like, you know, like
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You don't have to give up what you like just to be more performant.
To cut the head of it, you know, in a way.
Yeah.
But this something like this is also happening in our cloud native world, where cloud companies, they try to offer something to enterprises where they would retain their current applications and just kind of push them into cloud, but make a benefit out of the both worlds. But for one certain point here is very valid. You can it's not like a lot of investment in the full new development. You know, you can like really use the current solution, but just move it to a more modern way to host it and to keep it running. Definitely, it's a way it's an intermediary way, just on your way to the fully like distributed system, where you eventually might end up, but it will definitely take time before you migrate it like fully and natively your solution to the full Jamstack.
Right. It's kind of like you can like the illustration you were giving earlier. You don't have to cut the head off, but you might have to perform minor surgery. Eventually you'll get there.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. And yeah, Tomas, go on.
So I do have a question.
Sure.
If I need to trade in. So I get this API. So you create this basically this one API, or one API to rule them all kind of thing, right?
Right.
And so do you then generate the site? Because you did mention something about Next.js, if I remember correctly. So do you then generate the site, or can I then take? Do you have like an API endpoint that I can then call from a Gatsby app, for example, and then just because Gatsby and GraphQL, I mean, in the Jamstack, GraphQL is a popular thing, but Gatsby and GraphQL seems to be working especially well together. So I'm just curious, if you can show that how that would work, whether you can build a site from within TakeShape, or can I also expose this whole thing and then just consume it whatever I want to?
Yeah, absolutely. I was showing earlier this query here. That's kind of like an example query just to get all my products, right? But basically, this is not the place where you get the information. This is a place. All this is doing is submitting this query to this endpoint down here. It's a little hard to notice at first, but this is my GraphQL endpoint. I can do this from anything. Let me see.
So that's what you would call
created a site off of this.
Okay. Yeah. So this is what you call a traditional. This is a GraphQL playground, I think they call it. Right. And then you can just take that endpoint and then submit a query against it, and then you get the result what you see on the right, which is okay, it makes sense.
Absolutely. Actually, here, let me show you an example if I can get this other screen up. If I could pull up Adam here. There. So this is what I do. I've defined my take shape API key in this script here. I won't show it just for privacy reasons, but I've defined my take shape API key in there. And then down here in JavaScript, this is a client-side HTML page. I actually have my GraphQL query. This is the same take shape app, by the way. I was just showing you a different part of it. Here's the link. All we do is we post the query to the link, and you get your products out. And then I just hydrate the page with all that information. So in the end, you end up with a full-on product page that still conforms to a lot of the performance stuff you were talking about, but is essentially completely client-side rendered.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Hope that answers your question.
It does. Yeah. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. If you guys have any other questions, feel free to let me know at the Twitter link as well.
Yeah. I have just posted into the stream chat the URL link to the feedback form. So everyone who is watching us, feel free to fill out the feedback form. If you don't want to provide feedback, that's okay too. Just put your email and your name so that you can take part in our raffle, which we will run in a few minutes. To raffle off, we have 2 coupons from Netlify, each $25 value. And with these coupons, you can get some nice apparel from their Swag store, shipped for free, like worldwide, to your house. So make use of this opportunity. The chances are very good. We don't have.
It looks like that's not a link. Just so you know, that link isn't working.
Oh, let me just double check it. Maybe I forgot to.
Oh, I think you combined it with the next word.
Okay, that's my bad. Let me just. This is probably the specifics of the chat here on the stream. And let's try it again. Here it is. Here's the link. Try this one. Yeah, it just messed up with the following word. So everyone, use this link to provide your feedback. The feedback will be shared with our speakers afterwards. Yeah, we will. In the meanwhile, we can also discuss with you guys, with our experts, what do you think about very, very up-to-date topic? It kind of also touches upon Jamstack a little bit. What about the CDN, recent CDN failures? Have you heard about them? Like in the last few weeks? I think the Fastly was a huge one. And if I'm not completely wrong, there was a glitch with Akamai as well afterwards, like 1 or 2 weeks afterwards.
Yeah, I did hear about them. I think they said it was a patch or an update that they've done that effectively took down 90% of the internet. So yeah, we did talk about the Jamstack and the importance of the CDN. So for example, and I can only talk about this from Cloud University's perspective. I can't talk about what Netlify and Vercel, although I think I know what they do, but I can't state these as facts. But I can tell you that Cloud University, for example, so we use CDNs, right? Mm-hmm. We have our own, but we also have we use Fastly and we use some others as well. So if you are, I think this is multi-tenancy. If you're a multi-tenant, then you're going to be good, because then you have fallbacks from one CDN to the other if your architecture is set up that way. And as I said, I can't state this as a fact, but I think Netlify and probably Vercel, they also do multi-tenancy. So they don't only rely on just one single CDN provider, but on multiple. One other example is, Cloud University also serves images in China. And I think in order to do that, for us, we needed to have a very specific CDN that taps into the Chinese market as well. So even though things are bleak when CDNs are down, all these providers have ways, it's not necessarily ways around it, but almost like a backup solution for you.
I got to say, though, Fastly impressed me with its speed in getting things back online. Like, this happened in the middle of the night, their time at least. apparently I just went and looked up the times exactly. At 2:58 in the morning, they noted an error. By 4:10, it was fixed entirely. So yeah, a lot of sites went down, but it wasn't that big of a deal because they're such a reliable company to depend on.
Yeah.
So guys, do you think it can happen again? And do we need a kind of multi-CDN approach like what we have in multi-cloud? You know, like current enterprises, they are looking at a few cloud providers, like the major one, and they try to distribute their load across them with the plans, like big backup plans. Whenever one fails, the traffic will be immediately switched, or like the business solution will be switched to another provider. Should something like this be developed or provided by the by this big companies which are running the CDN networks?
I think they do that though. I mean, if something brings down the entire thing, you know, the entire network and all the servers, then of course it's going to be very difficult. And I think Fastly had they did have some backups, right? But then they got overloaded very quickly, which is of course understandable. But so here's the thing, right? We work in technology. Things will go wrong, unfortunately, right? It's 100% uptime is not a thing. You know, and you know, if it's not a physical failure, then it's, you know, and I didn't read what happened at Fastly exactly, but if I remember, it was something like a patch or someone did something bad, right? So it was almost like a human, a human doing something wrong. So these things will happen. They have happened before. Look, if you have a business that is absolutely critical that you need to run, 24/7, 365 for the next 10 years, then you need to look into multi-tenancy with backup systems, geographically distributed backup systems, etc., etc. Otherwise, you know, these things unfortunately happen. I think people accept the fact that, you know, in the same way how you go in a tunnel with your phone, you're not going to have a network connection. That's it. There's not much you can do about it. So you just, you know, accept it, I guess.
Yeah, kind of what I was thinking in that vein is that sometimes things are going to go wrong. So perhaps picking the most reliable company there is more important than picking, like, trying to get multiple providers. That's why I was saying, like, Fastly fixed it so quickly and they were right on top of it that it didn't really benefit big sites like Reddit to have their backup CDNs. While it was helpful to have that little bit of insurance, it was more important that they picked a good vendor to begin with.
Okay. Well, that's a great point.
Yeah.
So you still think of Fastly as a great provider because they have managed, not, that's okay that they had a failure. And I think it was a human factor they confessed later.
Yes.
But at the end, as you said, they just quickly managed this thing, and it was back and running, you know, in just in a very short time. That's great. So we have 6 people who, no, it's actually 5 people who submitted the form. Thank you very much for the feedback. I will also share it with the speakers later on. Let's close the form now, and I will start to share my screen. Just a second. Here it is. I will go with the tab. Let me just pick the right tab. Here we go. Just let me know once you have something on your screens.
There we go.
You should see it now. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So here are the 5 names. Let's really, I learned this tool works better when we shuffle a lot, and in between we can shuffle as well. So let's go for the first spin. So who will it be? It's Suman. Great. Congratulations. You just got first, the first voucher of $25, which you can redeem with Netlify. Again, a few times. And let's go for the second spin. And the second winner is, let's wait. Yeah, it's Rajesh. Amazing. Congratulations, Rajesh. You are getting the second voucher. And but we have goodies for everyone here. We have 2 free Jamstack ebooks which you can which you can study. And I will be sharing the links right now in the chat, and I will make sure that they don't mess up like last time. I think they should work. Let's see. Oh, it's just 2. I will split it. The message is too big. I have to split it in 2. This is the first book. This is the second book. Both of them are hosted on Netlify. It's a PDF books. You can download them. The second one I have discovered just recently. The first one is called Modern Web Development on the Jamstack. It's an O'Reilly book. The second one is Deploying Next.js on the Jamstack, the definitive guide. A great one as well. So that's it. We served the goodies, we served the talks, and I hope everyone is happy. We will keep returning to this topic because, as we confessed at the beginning, Jamstack is just conquering the world as we speak. These are still early days, so if you are excited about it, it's the right time to join this movement and develop your solutions, which are super reliable and distributed globally. So, any final words from you, Thomas and Jaden?
Explore the Jamstack. That's what I mean.
Yeah, I don't have anything real cheesy to say, but if you have any questions for me, I posted my Twitter link in the chat, so feel free to reach out. I'd love to chat with you guys.
Absolutely. So again, thank you everyone for attending this call and this meetup. Stay safe. If you will have any questions whatsoever, we will also send out a sum up email with all the details, with the recording, so you will get everything. If you missed it during the live event, you can watch the recording. Thanks for now. Take care and see you next time. Finishing the stream.